Once upon a time, in ghostly Japan, there was a waterfall called the Yuridaki, or the Cascade of Ghosts. At that time, at the base of the waterfall, there stood a small shrine, a Shinto shrine dedicated to the local god, Takidemoji, as well as a small wooden cash box for offerings to the god from visitors to the spot. Now, one cold winter evening, after the day's work was done, the women employed at a nearby hemp factory were warming themselves around a hot stove and amusing themselves by telling ghost stories. As the evening progressed, the stories became increasingly horrifying, each storyteller trying to top the previous tale, and the listeners grew increasingly uneasy and frightened, until one of the younger women blurted, "Imagine going to the Yuridaki, the Cascade of Ghosts, tonight, in the dark, alone." And the listeners shivered, and not because of the cold outside. Someone said, "I'd give all the hemp I spun today to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to do that." Then someone else said, "So would I." This led to a cascade of offers. "So would I. So would I." All of them said it. All of them, except a young woman named Okatsu, wife of a poor carpenter. "Listen," she said, "if all of you will pledge to give me all the hemp you've spun today, I will go to the Yuridaki, go to the Cascade of Ghosts." At first the other women thought she was joking, but realized that she was serious when Okatsu repeated the offer several times, and after a period of haggling and negotiation, all of the workers agreed to turn over all of their hemp. All of it, if Okatsu provided proof that she had actually visited the waterfall by returning with the cash box for the offerings to the god. Okatsu agreed to the terms and the sacrilege and set off into the icy darkness with her 2-year-old son sound asleep and strapped warmly on her back. The night was cold but clear. Okatsu made her way down the dark village street, then along a path through the woods, until she could hear the roar of the cataract and began to feel the freezing spray on her face. Soon Okatsu was able to see the shrine and the money box, but as she made her way towards it, hands outstretched to grab the offerings and run, she heard a voice over the thundering of the cascade. "Oi, Okatsu-san!" It was a loud, thundering voice which seemed to emanate from the very waterfall itself. Okatsu stood rooted to the spot, rooted in sheer terror, her hand still extended towards the cash box. "Oi, Okatsu-san!" The voice came again, louder and angrier and threatening. Okatsu's heart was in her mouth, as she knew the god was warning her to stop and to leave. But Okatsu has been described as a bold woman, and her poverty meant she needed the extra hemp. So forcing herself to ignore her fear, she grabbed the money and ran. When she returned to the factory, the other women were amazed at the proof she had actually done it, actually taken up the dare, actually taken the property of a god. And then they were even more horrified when they learned the god had called out to her, warning her to stop and warning her by name. "I guess you've earned all the hemp," a shocked voice said, while another asked, "Okatsu, but isn't your baby hungry?" "It's time I fed him," Okatsu said happily. "He's been very patient, very quiet." Okatsu removed the child from her back, then dropped him with a scream, her hands covered in blood. her son's head had been chewed off. The gods are not mocked. Night. Night always brings strange illusions. But in Martinique, shadows seldom alarm the solitary wanderer, as they know that even at noon, even on the boulevards of the city, the zombies walk, and that there are other evil things which walk abroad under the eye of the sun, even at high noontide. It is a still and sultry noon. It is the hour of rest. A woman is coming along the road, young, very swarthy, very tall and barefooted, wearing a black robe, a high white turban with dark stripes, and a white foulard thrown about her fine shoulders. She bears no burden and walks very swiftly. The approach of this woman has been already observed by the sugar-cane workers living in the nearby village. But who is she? Two young men, Gabot and Raffi, step from their doorways, remove their big straw hats, and salute her with a simultaneous "Bonjour, Mansell." "Bonjour, Missy," she responds, ignoring Gabot, but smiling upon Raffi as she passes. Gabot draws back in horror. Something in the gaze of the stranger terrifies him. "She does not make me afraid," laughs Raffi, boldly following her with a swagger. "Raffi!" cries Gabot in alarm, but Raffi does not heed. The strange woman has slackened her pace, as if inviting pursuit, and in another moment he is at her side, and she asks him to accompany her, to escort her to her village some miles away. And as she puts the question, she stands still and gazes at him. Yet Raffi hesitates. He sees far down the road. Whee! How fast they have been walking! He sees far down the road Gabot calling him back. For an instant he thinks of the distance, of the white road glaring in the dead heat. Then he looks again into the black eyes of the strange woman and answers, "Oui," with a burst of mischievous laughter, in which Raffi joins. She walks on, Raffi striding at her side, and Gabot, far off, watches them go, and wonders if he will ever see his friend again. She quickens her pace and begins to sing, but Raffi cannot keep up to her and has been left behind. Already his thin shirt is saturated with sweat. His breathing is almost panting, yet his companion's skin shows no moisture. Her silent respiration reveals no effort, and she laughs at him. And Raffi, utterly bewitched, wonders more and more just who she is, while up ahead she waits for him with her mocking smile. But Gabot, who has been following and watching from afar and calling for his friend to come back, suddenly starts, halts, turns, and hurries away, fearfully crossing himself. He has seen the sign by which she is known. No one ever saw her by night. Her hour is the dead hush and white flame of noon. Mostly she haunts the mountain roads, winding from plantation to plantation, from hamlet to hamlet, sometimes close to the city, a woman, simply clad, of lofty stature and strange beauty, silently standing in the light, keeping her eyes fixed upon the sun. Hours pass. Dusk is upon them. Still, the woman and Raffi walk together, chatting loudly, laughing, chanting snatches of song. The valley is well behind them, and all at once the woman leaves the main road, climbing a steep, narrow path leading up through the woods. But Raffi hesitates, uneasy, as he looks up the dark path. Where is she going? It is the shortest route, she cries. But what about snakes? The fer-de-lance? There are none. Not a single one, she says. She has often taken the path. She leads the way. For a little while Raffi can plainly see her, but as the path moves into shadow, only the white turban and the white foulard remain visible. And then he can see her no more, and calls to her in alarm. She takes his hand, but how cold it is! She walks swiftly, surely, as one who knows the path by heart. Ahead, in the darkness, a dull, vast rushing sound rises into the night. Her face is in the darkness as she stands before him. Raffi still holds her hand, which he fondles lovingly, murmuring to her in sweet undertones. Do you love me? She whispers. Oh, yes, 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 more than any living thing. Yet she seems to doubt him and repeats the question over and over. And all the while, gently, caressingly, she draws him a little nearer to her side, nearer to the great dull rushing sound that rises from beyond them, a mighty waterfall off in the darkness. Do you love me? Oui, oui, he responds. And she suddenly turns to look at him, her face transformed into the leer of a grotesque, deformed goblin, as she shrieks with a burst of hideous laughter, Then die! The woman, the Gayables, La Gayables, pushes Raffi violently, and he reels and falls backwards over the edge of a cliff which had been hidden by the shadows, crashing 2,000 feet down to his death on the rocks of a mountain torrent, the mighty waterfall in the darkness. Last year, I produced a video based on the M.R. James story, The Rose Garden. In my version of the story, the protagonist is pursued by demonic owls. While taking an evening stroll through a big park in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. It is, of course, a work of fiction. The night floaters are real. My story was fiction. What are the night floaters? Malignant beings able to detach their heads from the trunks of their bodies, the heads then being able to fly or float at will. They fly through the night to feed on the blood, the flesh, and the sanity of potential victims. Imagine my surprise then on receiving the following email from a man who only identified himself as Dave. In your recent video, you referred to walking in a park without trees, just flowers and shrubs. From the description, I assume you're referring to A.E. Wilson Park, particularly the east side. But as you should know, the west side of the park has plenty of bushes and trees, and there is even a swampy island surrounded by the creek. My girlfriend and I had a weird experience there last spring, not long after your encounter with the owls, or as you call them, harpies. We were walking across the footbridge when my girlfriend drew my attention to some round white objects, which she could see flitting through the shrubbery on the island. And I was astounded, on taking a closer look, to see that they were actually human heads. We stopped on the bridge and watched 4 heads, 2 men, 1 old, 1 young, and 2 women, all of them butt ugly. Imagine our horror when we realized they were actually eating bugs and mosquitoes, like they were bats. We stayed quiet, and after a few minutes, they flew or floated off in the darkness. My girlfriend wanted to leave right then, but I wanted to see if I could find out anything more about these heads, which I assumed were those night floaters you hear about on the net. We went over the bridge and into the shrubbery on the little island, and in the distance, we could hear this strange and ominous moaning, like from a pack of vengeful ghosts. It was dark as hell in there, and wet and cold too. It was early in May, eh? We followed the twisty path and ended up in this clearing. And what do you think we found? 4 headless bodies. The 2 guys and 2 gals. Totally butt naked. Butt naked in 14 Celsius weather. My girl was totally freaking out, and we got the hell out of there, fast. Had we stumbled onto a mass murder scene? I didn't think so, not in Regina, Saskatchewan. But I remembered the night floaters are supposed to detach their heads from their bodies in order to hunt for human flesh, and that sometimes they stripped off before transforming. We could still hear this weird ghost moaning, which made us pick up our pace. They swooped us as we crossed the bridge, all 4, shrieking and gnashing their teeth. One of the women actually bit down on Sharon's long hair, but let go when I punched her in the face. WSJ here. I hope Dave meant that he punched the head in the face, not that he punched Sharon in the face. To continue, we ran full tilt for the car, with them dive-bombing us all the way. I managed to get my belt off and swung it at them. Buckle end. I connected a few times too. Hope I put out an eye or 2. We weren't home safe when we piled into the car either. I tore out of there and headed north on McCarthy, going like hell. But 2 of the heads, the old guy and one of the skanks, chased us all the way to Mickelson. So, if I were you, I'd stay out of that park too. Your choice is between great horned owls or night floaters. Thanks, Dave, for contacting me and sharing your story. I was aware of the presence of night floaters in that park, after a librarian friend had an encounter there last summer. And I take your point, but you can avoid dangerous encounters with malignant beings, even if you stay at home with a blanket over your head. I have had both floaters and owls outside my house at night, so there's no escape. I'm interested in your reference to the floaters eating insects. They are known to eat bugs when they can't get other sustenance, other flesh, a tendency documented by the author Lafcadio Hearn in Kubi in his collection of Japanese ghost stories, Kwaidan. Once upon a time and back in the day, a samurai named Isoge, skilled in the fighting arts, gave up his profession and became a traveling Buddhist monk. Isoge was traveling through a mountainous region when darkness overtook him far from any village or habitation, so he resolved to spend the night in the open. Isoge had no sooner lay down on the hard ground when a woodcutter came along the road. He was astonished to see the priest and warned him the place was haunted by goblin foxes and goblin badgers, but Isoge laughed and said he wasn't afraid of hairy things. The woodcutter invited Isoge to spend the night at his humble abode, even if he couldn't offer his guest anything to eat. The priest liked the man's polite manner and accepted. After a walk through the woods, they arrived at a small thatched cottage. Inside, Isoge found 4 others, both men and women, all of whom looked lean and hungry. As it was dark, they retired for the night, the priest being given his own small room. Isoge sat up for some time, saying his prayers by the light of a small lamp. But in the wee small hours, he became thirsty and left his room to get a drink from the stream running past the cottage. Isoge went into the main room and stopped dead. On the floor were 5 headless corpses. Have I stumbled across a crime scene, he wondered. But there was no blood, and the necks did not appear to have been slashed or cut. The priest then realized he had been lured into a nest of Urokurokubi, flesh-eating ghouls. Isoge knew that the way to destroy such a goblin was to remove or hide its body, as the head would be unable to reattach itself. So opening a window, he threw the woodcutters, the lead goblin's, body out into the darkness. Isoge then slipped outside, out into the gentle night, and found a hiding place behind a tree trunk. Soon he heard voices, and then saw the 5 heads flitting through the night and eating bugs and worms off the ground and off the sides of the trees. They chatted as they dined. The one who had pretended to be a woodcutter said, "Someone go see if that wretched priest has finished praying. He must be done by now. It's nearly morning. If he's asleep, we'll dine on his fat body, on the delicious flesh. No doubt he will make a tasty morsel." One of the female heads darted off, but soon came screeching back. "The priest is gone, and so is your body. He has hidden it." "He has killed me," bellowed the woodcutter. "We must find that priest and kill him." The 5 heads began to frantically scud through the shadows until one of the females screeched, "There he is, behind that tree." Isoge grabbed a stout branch and used it as a club to strike at the carnivorous heads as they lunged at him, teeth snapping like angry wolves. The woodcutter's head clamped its jaws firmly onto the sleeve of Isoge's robe, but the priest grabbed it by its long hair and beat it over and over with the thick branch until it was dead. 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 but still firmly locked by its teeth to the arm of the robe. Day was breaking. The priest returned to the cottage, but the others, the goblins, had fled. And so Isoge continued his journey. But later that day, whilst traversing an isolated mountain path, the priest was assailed by a robber who ordered him to strip. Guess he wanted to steal everything. But the startled bandit dropped the robe when he saw what was clamped onto the sleeve. "Sir priest, I am a bad man, but not even a sinner like me would carry the head of a murdered man around with me." "But," Isogai said, "it is the head of a goblin, not a man." "Ha!" the highwayman barked with delight. "Not only do you murder, but you're brazen enough to tell jokes about it." The robber was so impressed, he traded his new robe for Isogei's old one, complete with its dangling head, and gave the priest 5 yen as well. Who says crime doesn't pay? However, much as I want the night floaters and the creatures of the night to leave me alone, I think I'll pass on carrying a decapitated head around with me to scare them off. Even if 2 heads are better than 1. The Rose Garden. Grandpa's story by this name appeared in his 1911 collection, More Ghost Stories. You should check out the original. It's a rather subtle tale. Well, grandson W.S.J. lives in Regina, Saskatchewan, on the Canadian prairies. So I don't really do rose gardening. But I do like to walk around Lake Wascana in beautiful Wascana Park in the middle of town. So this is my story. It isn't very subtle, but it is true. I had had a rough day at work and decided to decompress by going for a long walk around the lake, a distance of just over 3 kilometers. That's 2 miles for you American listeners. It usually took me about 45 minutes to an hour to hike. Okay, so I'm a slow poke. It was late April, when the local weather is still rather dicey. In fact, it had been a long, hard winter, so there were still mounds of dirty snow under the trees and along the sides of the path. It also gets dark early in April, and it was already dusk when I left my car at the Wascana Center and headed west, knowing I would finish my walk in total darkness. And darkness fell with a thud in about 10 minutes, at which point I was walking through an area of thick shadow and bushes and fir trees. And I heard the call of an owl, a great horned owl. If you've ever heard the hoot of a great horned owl, you'll never forget it. If you have never heard it, I'll do my best to imitate it. But if you're ever walking through the woods and you hear the call of the great horned owl, don't hoot back. I made that mistake once and was immediately swooped by a very angry and very territorial owl, and he only missed because I hit the dirt. I could imagine what those razor-sharp talons would have done to my scalp, and from then on, I treated the great horns with respect, if not affection. I wasn't too surprised on hearing the owl. As I said, it had been a long, harsh winter with lots of snow and -30 temperatures. And with many of the country fields snowbound, owls and other birds of prey had been forced to enter the city to hunt for food. What did surprise me was that there was more than one owl. I must have passed the tree where the owl was perched, for the next time I heard it, it was behind me. But up ahead, another great horned owl hooted a response. Almost like they're talking, I said to myself. But in reality, they were probably just marking their territory. But off towards the other side of the lake, a second bird called. Wow, there seems to be a whole flock of owls here. They usually don't hang out together. And then I heard the sound of wings overhead and saw a dark shadow alight on a bare branch directly above me. An owl. And she called my name. I Heard the Owl Call My Name is a famous novel by Margaret Craven. You should check it out from your local library. The title refers to a First Nations belief that the hoot of an owl is a warning of imminent death. Well, I'd heard owls hoot before, and I had hooted back. And I was still here. But when I said the owl called my name, I meant it literally. It really had called me by name. WSJ. WSJ. It was a mocking female voice. And yes, I have some familiarity with mocking female voices. Even stranger, I didn't think the owl, the woman, whoever had spoken to me out loud. For I was certain I heard it in my head. Not out loud, in my head, like telepathy, if that makes any sense. And I was equally certain that the great horned owl, perched above me, was the being which had spoken. Well, I picked up the pace, following the trail as it moved past the bandshell, when I heard another saucy woman's voice. WSJ. WSJ. We see you. Glancing up quickly, I could see a great horned owl standing like a gargoyle atop the bandshell, and even as I watched, it was joined by a second bird. It was the owl that had originally hooted at me, and which appeared to be following me. Yeah, the one that had originally hooted at me, and it was following me. I increased my speed, following the trail as it curved around the west side of the lake, as I was determined to get to the other side of the water and away from the night birds. Behind me I could hear the two owls call, and from the other side of the lake, in the direction I was headed, there came an answering reply. They had me in their sights. Their night sights? Worse, as the trail took me past the nearby Albert Street Bridge, I saw a great horned owl perched atop of one of the decorative pillars. It was watching me. I hurried along, passing the front of the legislative building, and realized I was about to enter an area with a lot more trees and shrubbery, and a lot more darkness. I thought about turning around and heading back the way I came, but I didn't want to meet those owls who had called to me. And I also had another problem. I had another problem. Another problem. I had to go. I had to go. Really badly. And the only washrooms that were open were ahead in the trees, in the darkness. I walked as fast as my overweight bod would allow, spurred on by fear and by the pressure on my bladder. And all the time, I could hear wings overhead and the hooting of owls in the darkness. The area near the washroom was plunged in almost total blackness, and I realized, with a shock, that all the nearby streetlights were out. In the enveloping gloom, I made my way slowly along the barely discernible paths until the gray bulk of the concrete washroom building loomed before me. And then I heard her say one word, "Now." And the air was immediately filled with wings and talons and beaks, and it was also filled with sardonic female laughter. I ran in blind terror and blindly, as it was too dark to see. My toque was immediately pulled from my head, and when I threw up my arms for protection, I could feel the fabric of my winter coat being torn and clawed. I collided with the concrete wall of the lavatory, then staggered into the little alcove leading to the door of the men's room. Locked. Of course it was locked. It was locked. Reeling in terror and despair, I stumbled out into the nearby roadway and was blinded by intense white light, followed by a loud, terrific screech. But the screech of brakes, not a bird of prey. "Hey, buddy," an angry voice yelled out. "You trying to get killed or something?" It was a young guy in a big black Dodge Ram pickup, and I told him I had been attacked by an owl and could he please give me a ride back to the Wascana Center? I'm sure he thought I was nuts, but he obliged, and I got my car and drove straight home. I was just unlocking my side door when I heard the woman, the original woman, the original owl, my nemesis, speaking to me from a nearby fir tree. She said in her snarky, insulting voice, "Catch you next time, WSJ. Catch you next time." I don't walk around Lake Wascana anymore, and I never walk at night. Instead, when I need a walk, I head to the A.E. Wilson Park, where I walk the trails on the eastern side. It has a nice pond, some flower beds, and no trees. Why these owls, these harpies, why they still want to attack me, I just don't know. I've been harassed in the past by the night floaters. Perhaps they're friends, allies. Well, in future, owl ladies, harpies, let's not meet. But if you insist, catch me if you can. If, and that's a big if. WSJ here. Hope you found this yarn a hoot. Be sure to check out the original in print, or listen to one of the fine recordings of it available on YouTube. I don't know why the Harpies had it in for me. Must have been all those trips to Hooters. And here's a true story. I once dropped my elderly mother off at a shopping mall in Western New York so she could spend the day at her favorite activity, visiting the stores. And when I picked her up at 5 o'clock, she said, "Oh, you should have stayed with me. I had lunch at the most wonderful place, and you should have seen the waitresses. They were all stunning, beautiful girls, real knockouts. You would have enjoyed it." And I said to her, "Oh, well, that sounds interesting. What was the name of the place, Mom?" And she thought for a moment. She said, "Well, it had kind of a funny name. Oh, yeah, it was called Hooters. Isn't that cute? Hooters." Mom, you were cute yourself, and I miss you. I really do. So please share this video. Comment. I love comments and try to respond. I really do. Drop a like. At least I hope you liked it. And consider subscribing for more Night Floaters, Ghost Stories of a Librarian, and who knows, maybe even more Hooters. Stay hungry, but watch what you eat, and also watch where you eat.